Is it really too late to reclaim the life you have sacrificed for others? Eleanor. Mark. Sarah. Arthur. The scent of lavender and old linen, ghosts of countless wash cycles clung to my fingers. It was a familiar comfort, perhaps the only one left in this house where I, Eleanor Vance, resided more as a fixture than a person. 65 years I'd walked this earth, and for 40 of those years my steps had worn paths between the kitchen, the laundry room, and the sewing nook tucked away under the eaves. My days were measured by the rhythmic hum of the Singer machine, a counterpoint to the solemn ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock, like me, that faithfully marked time for a household that rarely glanced its way, too preoccupied with its own urgent pulse. Life with my son, Mark, and his wife Sarah had settled into a pattern, predictable, and yet increasingly frayed. Mark, now 42, navigated life with a certain breezy entitlement, a legacy of having his needs anticipated and met before he even voiced them. He wasn't intentionally cruel, I told myself, merely oblivious. Wrapped up in his own ambitions, the often unspoken sacrifices underpinning his comfort remained invisible to him. Sarah, 41, was different, sharper, more deliberate in her disregard. She moved through my house, the house George, my late husband, and I had built, filled with memories she had no claim to, with an air of impatient ownership. Her expectations were a silent, heavy pressure, a constant demand for service disguised as household necessity. They relied on me. Oh, how they relied on me. For the spotless floors, the meals appearing like clockwork, the mended clothes, the meticulously ironed shirts Mark needed for his perpetually important meetings, and though it was never, ever spoken aloud, they relied on the quiet cushion of my modest pension, the buffer that smoothed over the rough edges of their increasingly strained budget, though they never acknowledged that last part. I saw the unopened bills piling up on Mark's desk when I dusted, heard the clipped, anxious tones of his late-night phone calls, but I said nothing. Compliance had become my default setting, the path of least resistance woven over decades, stitch by painful, invisible stitch. My solace, my silent rebellion was my sewing, and the pinnacle of that quiet dedication, the repository of decades of unspoken dreams, was the quilt, the mariner's compass. It lay spread across the guest room bed, a masterpiece born of patience and stubborn love, a kaleidoscope of deep oceanic blues, seafoam greens, and sun-bleached creams, its intricate points meeting with a geometric precision that belied the trembling hands that had guided the needle in recent years. 20 years, piece by tiny, meticulous piece, I'd worked on it, during the long nights waiting for Mark to come home from college parties, through the endless days nursing George in his final illness, in stolen moments between loads of laundry and simmering pots. Each hexagon, each diamond, each perfectly executed point held a memory, a whispered prayer, a fragment of the woman I was before I became just Mom or Eleanor. It wasn't just fabric and thread. It was my history charted in silk and cotton, my autobiography written in stitches. The desecration, when it happened, was appallingly casual. The air in the house felt stale that afternoon, so I'd gone to open the guest room window, and there it was. The quilt, my life's work, was crumpled on the floor near the window seat. Sarah's pampered white poodle, Coco, a creature whose presence in my home I merely tolerated, was burrowed contentedly in its center, gnawing thoughtfully on a corner fringe point I'd spent a week perfecting. Dark, muddy paw prints smeared across the cream-colored center medallion. Like a deliberate insult, a wave of icy shock washed over me, prickling my skin, stealing my breath. The room tilted slightly. "Sarah!" My voice cracked, sharper, louder than I'd intended. She appeared in the doorway a moment later, phone pressed to her ear, mid-conversation. She lowered it slightly, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised in annoyance. "What is it, Eleanor? I'm on a call." "The quilt," I choked out, pointing with a hand that suddenly felt disconnected from my body. "Coco, look." Sarah followed my gesture, her gaze skimming over the scene with infuriating indifference. "Oh, that," she said, her attention already drifting back to her phone screen. She nudged the dog absently with her expensive loafer. "Coco needed a comfy spot. He probably got muddy in the garden. Don't worry, it's washable, right?" She turned back to her call. "Sorry about that. Where were we? Washable." The word hung in the air, obscene, as if my quilt, my 20-year masterpiece, was a bathroom mat, as if the hours, the dedication, the love stitched into every fiber could simply be laundered away like common dirt. Something stretched taut inside me for 40 years, something worn thin by countless compromises and swallowed resentments, finally snapped. The sound was deafening. In the sudden silence of my own mind. "It is not washable, Sarah," I said. My voice was low, dangerously quiet, vibrating with a cold fury that surprised even me. "It's silk, it's hand-stitched, and your dog has ruined it." She finally lowered her phone completely, irritation flashing in her eyes. "Honestly, Eleanor, don't be so dramatic. Just a quilt, a blanket. We can buy you another one if it means that much to you." "Buy another one?" The question echoed, incredulous. The sheer, breathtaking ignorance of her statement stole my breath again. "This took me 20 years, Sarah. 20 years of my life are in that quilt." Mark arrived then, drawn by the raised voices, his face settling into its familiar mask of weary patience, the one he wore whenever I became emotional. "What's going on? What's all the shouting?" "Your mother," Sarah sighed, rolling her eyes dramatically, "is having a complete meltdown because Coco took a nap on her old blanket." "It is not an old blanket." The shout ripped from my throat, raw and ragged. I felt tears, hot and angry, spring to my eyes. "It's my mariner's compass. It's the most important thing I own, and you let your spoiled, muddy dog destroy it." Mark looked from the quilt, finally seeming to register the paw prints and the chewed corner, then to my tear-streaked face. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, calm down, okay? It was an accident. Coco didn't know any better." He stepped towards me, reaching out a placating hand. "Sarah's right. It's just a quilt. We can get it cleaned. Or we'll buy you a new one. A really nice one. Just don't make such a big deal out of it. Just a quilt. Just 20 years. Just the one beautiful thing I had created solely for myself in a life dedicated to serving others. Just another sacrifice demanded, another piece of me dismissed as unimportant." My mind flashed back, sharp and painful. Mark, 18, accepted into his first-choice university out of state. The tuition was staggering, far more than George and I could afford. George was already showing signs of the illness that would eventually take him, his own small business faltering. Panic had gnawed at me. How could we deny Mark this chance? So I'd taken the locket, my mother's locket, heavy gold, intricately carved, the only tangible piece of her I had left. I'd walked into the pawn shop on the other side of town, my cheeks burning with shame, and traded that piece of my heart for a check. I'd presented the money to Mark, weaving a story about a forgotten insurance policy finally paying out. He'd hugged me, ecstatic, blinded by his own bright future, never questioning, never noticing the bare space on my neck where the locket used to rest. That sacrifice, like so many others, had vanished without a trace, absorbed into the foundation of his life, unseen, unacknowledged, just like the paw print on my quilt. That night, dinner remained uncooked. The kitchen stayed dark and silent. I sat in the wingback chair in the living room, the quilt, carefully cleaned as best I could, the stain faded but still visible, the fringe frayed, folded reverently on my lap. My fingers traced the intricate stitching of the center medallion, the place where the muddy print had been. A permanent scar. Mark and Sarah eventually emerged, hunger making them irritable. "Mom, is dinner ready?" Mark asked, peering into the empty dining room, his tone laced with impatience. "I didn't make any," I replied, my voice flat, my eyes fixed on the quilt. "What? Why not?" Sarah sounded genuinely affronted, as if I'd broken some sacred law. "We're starving. Mark had a long day." "Figure it out," I repeated, the words tasting like newfound freedom on my tongue. Mark sighed, that long-suffering sound that usually preceded a lecture designed to make me feel guilty. "Mom, look, I know you're still upset about the quilt, okay? I get it, but this is childish. We need to eat. You need to eat. Childish." My one act of passive resistance, my refusal to perform my expected role after a profound hurt, was childish. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I remained silent. They exchanged frustrated glances, then retreated to the kitchen. The smell of burnt toast and microwave leftovers soon filled the air, punctuated by the sharp, irritable clatter of dishes. They ate standing up in the kitchen, their backs to me, their conversation consisting of low, angry murmurs. Later, they ordered pizza, the greasy smell an alien presence in my usually fragrant home. They ate it in the living room, watching some loud reality TV show, pointedly ignoring the silent woman in the wingback chair. The air crackled with their unspoken resentment, their utter lack of comprehension. As twilight bled into evening, I slipped out onto the porch, seeking refuge in the cool air. The scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden drifted over the fence. Soon Arthur Finch ambled over from next door, his customary pipe unlit in his hand. He leaned on the railing beside my swing, his presence a quiet comfort in the growing darkness. "Evening, Eleanor," he murmured. He didn't ask what was wrong, didn't pry. He simply stood there, a silent witness. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice soft, his gaze distant. "Martha, my wife, she held on to things, little hurts, disappointments, never spoke them aloud, thought it was strength, I suppose. But holding it all in, it hollows you out." He finally turned his gaze to me, his eyes holding a deep, weary understanding. "Sometimes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the quietest thread is the one that holds everything together, until it snaps." His words landed like balm on a raw wound. He saw it. He understood the invisible threads, the silent strain. A neighbor I exchanged maybe a dozen words with a month understood more than my own son, my own daughter-in-law. Just then, Mark pushed open the screen door, the empty pizza box dangling from his hand. His face was set in lines of exasperation. "Mom, are you just going to sit out here sulking all night? This is ridiculous." He saw Arthur and nodded curtly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the intrusion. He turned back to me, his voice regaining its authoritative tone. "Just apologize to Sarah about making such a fuss over the quilt, and let's move on from this nonsense. Apologize." to Sarah, for her dog ruining my quilt, for my grief being inconvenient. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it took my breath away. The years of yielding, of smoothing things over, of prioritizing their comfort above my own feelings, it all culminated in this moment, this final, unbearable demand. I looked at him, my son, the center of my world for so long, the recipient of countless unseen sacrifices. I saw the entitlement etched onto his features, the casual disregard for my pain, and the familiar urge to comply, to placate, to restore the fragile peace at any cost. It simply wasn't there. It had vanished, burned away by the cold fire that had been smoldering within me for decades. In its place was something new, something hard and clear, and unwavering. "No," I said. The word was quiet, almost swallowed by the evening air, but it resonated with the force of a slamming door. He stared, blinking, genuinely shocked into silence. It was perhaps the first time in his adult life I had ever denied him anything outright. "No?" he repeated, bewildered. "No," I affirmed, my voice gaining strength. I stood up from the swing, the ruined quilt still clutched in my hands like a fragile shield. "I will not apologize, and I am not moving on." I looked him squarely in the eye, letting him see the stranger I had become in the space of a single afternoon. "Something needs to change, Mark, drastically, starting right now." I turned, leaving him speechless on the porch, and walked back into the house, the click of the screen door closing behind me sounding unnervingly like the locking of a final decisive bolt. The pattern was broken. The mending, this time, would not be done by me. The house became a battleground of unspoken hostilities, heavy with the smog of resentment. Days turned into a week, then 2. A cold war waged in slammed doors, mostly theirs, pointed silences, and meals eaten in separate rooms, if meals were eaten at all. They expected me to crack, of course, to tire of my own quiet rebellion, to miss the rhythm of service, to eventually apologize for the disruption my feelings had caused. When I didn't, when the silence stretched, punctuated only by the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator, their confusion curdled into outright palpable anger. The household, deprived of its invisible engine, its quiet caretaker, began to visibly fray. Dust bunnies gathered like small defiant armies in the corners. The laundry hamper overflowed, a monument to their helplessness. The refrigerator, once meticulously stocked by me, held a sad collection of wilting vegetables and half-empty takeout containers. Sarah's passive aggression escalated. It became an art form, a misplaced set of keys. "Oh, Eleanor, have you seen Mark's car keys? He's going to be late for his very important meeting." A strategically spilled glass of water. "Oops, so clumsy of me. Could you grab a towel, Eleanor? You always know where they are." Or the loud sighs from the kitchen, accompanied by the clatter of pans. "It's just impossible to keep up with everything when you're working so hard," she'd lament to Mark, her voice carrying clearly into the living room where I sat reading. "Some people just don't appreciate the effort it takes to maintain a home, do they?" Mark, meanwhile, attempted a different manipulation tactic. Weaponized concern intertwined with blatant financial pressure. He started leaving bank statements, highlighted in ominous red ink, and overdue notices strategically placed where I couldn't possibly miss them, on the kitchen counter, atop my sewing basket, even tucked into the book I was reading. Then came the carefully orchestrated, deeply disingenuous conversations. "Mom, I'm really worried about you," he began one evening, finding me sketching in a notebook in the living room. He sank onto the ottoman opposite me, leaning forward, his face a mask of practiced filial anxiety. You seem so withdrawn, so unlike yourself. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should see Dr. Evans, just for a checkup. We just want to make sure you're all right." I saw the calculation glinting behind the concerned facade. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was laying the groundwork. If I was unwell, perhaps I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs, my own finances. The competency evaluation. The thought sent a fresh chill down my spine. I closed my sketchbook slowly, deliberately. "I'm perfectly fine, Mark. Just tired of being taken for granted." He pressed on, smoothly shifting gears. Okay. I understand you're upset, and maybe we haven't been appreciative enough. But Mom," he lowered his voice, adopting a confidential man-to-man, or rather son-to-mother tone. "We really need to talk about the finances. Seriously this time." He gestured vaguely at the pile of mail on the side table. "Things haven't been great with the business. Some investments went south. Unexpected expenses. You know how it is." He sighed, a picture of beleaguered responsibility. "The point is, we budgeted, Mom. We budgeted counting on your pension contribution. Without it," he let the sentence hang, heavy with implied disaster, financial ruin looming just beyond the horizon. There it was, the raw, exposed nerve, the core of their panic. My quiet financial support wasn't just a helpful supplement. It was the essential thread holding their precarious lifestyle together. My compliance wasn't merely convenient. It was critical to maintaining their carefully constructed image, to hiding Mark's ongoing failures. The stakes weren't just emotional anymore. They were starkly, terrifyingly financial. My refusal wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a direct existential threat. "My pension is for my retirement, Mark," I stated calmly, my voice devoid of the tremor I felt inside. "It was never intended to fund your failing business ventures or Sarah's insatiable appetite for new things." His face tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "It's not like that. It's for the household, the mortgage, the utilities. It benefits all of us. You live here too, don't forget." "Do I?" I countered, meeting his gaze directly. "Or do I merely reside here, providing services and funds that primarily benefit you and Sarah, allowing you to live significantly beyond your means while I pick up the slack? And the bills?" I held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. "How much debt are you actually in, Mark? The real number this time." He flinched, color flooding his neck and face. That's none of your business," he stammered, his composure cracking. "It's temporary, a cash flow issue. I can handle it. I don't need you questioning my ability to manage my own affairs." "Can you?" I asked quietly, letting the question hang in the air. "Because from where I'm sitting, Mark, it looks an awful lot like you're drowning, and you expect me to be your life raft, again." The memory of that secret second mortgage, the weight I'd carried silently for years, burned like acid in my chest. I thought of the anxious, sleepless nights, the constant scrimping, the fear of discovery, all while he enjoyed the fruits of my risk, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant. And for what? To be dismissed, disregarded, and now pressured again, threatened even because his choices led to his problems. He shot to his feet, anger radiating off him in waves. "I can't talk to you when you're like this. You're being completely unreasonable. You're twisting everything." He stormed out of the room, slamming the study door behind him with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the wall. Later that week, the late afternoon sun casting long, melancholic shadows across the lawn, Arthur found me attempting to prune the neglected roses, my hands clumsy, my mind miles away. He brought over his familiar thermos of hot tea and 2 mugs, settling onto the old stone bench beside me without a word, allowing the quiet to stretch. Heard some raised voices. "From your place the other night," Arthur remarked eventually, his tone gentle, non-judgmental, as he poured the steaming tea. "Everything all right over there, Eleanor?" I sighed, accepting the warmth of the mug, the fragrant steam curling around my face like a fragile shield. "Define all right, Arthur," I murmured. I hesitated, the habit of swallowing my troubles deeply ingrained, but looking into his kind, steady eyes, feeling the weight of his quiet support, the words tumbled out. The financial pressure, Mark's evasiveness about his debts, the chilling implication behind his checkup suggestion, my growing fear that they might try something drastic, something legal, to gain control. Arthur listened patiently, his brow furrowing slightly, his expression growing serious as I spoke. He told me then, more fully, about his late wife, Martha, and her own difficult struggles with her overbearing siblings after her parents passed away. How they had tried to pressure her into selling the family home, questioned her decisions, even subtly hinted at challenging her competence when she refused to bend to their will. "Greed does ugly things to people, Eleanor," he said again, his voice heavy with remembered pain. "Even family. Sometimes, especially family. Martha learned the hard way. She had to protect herself first, put legal safeguards in place, clear boundaries." He looked me directly in the eye, his gaze kind but unflinching. "Maybe it's time you thought about doing the same, my dear. Legal safeguards, power of attorney." The overheard whisper, competency evaluations, for her own good, echoed with chilling clarity in my mind. My fear solidified into cold, hard certainty. They weren't just stressed. They were desperate. And desperate people, cornered people, do desperate things. You think they'd really try something like that? My voice was barely a whisper, the question hanging in the cool air. Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "I think you need to be prepared for anything, Eleanor. Hope for the best, yes, but prepare for the worst. Talk to a lawyer. Understand your rights. Protect your assets. Protect your autonomy. Don't wait until it's too late." His words landed with undeniable weight. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, every rustle of leaves outside my window seemed amplified, sinister. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the house, the low murmur of the television from the living room where Sarah often fell asleep, the intermittent click of Mark's keyboard from the study, as he likely wrestled with his failing finances. Were they plotting? Downstairs right now, discussing finances, discussing lawyers, discussing me? The sense of being trapped, of being potentially undermined, betrayed, in the very place that was supposed to be my sanctuary, was suffocating. Around 2 a.m., the house finally silent. I couldn't bear the anxious waiting any longer. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the stillness, driven by a desperate, gnawing need for confirmation, for the undeniable truth, however ugly. I slipped out of bed. The floorboards felt cold beneath my bare feet as I crept down the hallway, each step agonizingly slow, towards the study. The door was slightly ajar, just as it had been nights before, a sliver of pale light spilling out, slicing through the darkness. Mark was inside, hunched over his desk, the dim glow of the computer screen illuminating his face. He held his phone pressed tightly to his ear, his voice a low, urgent whisper that carried unnervingly in the quiet house. "No," She still won't budge, stubborn as ever, digging her heels in. A pause, filled only by the faint hum of the computer. Talking about lawyers now, protecting her assets. Can you believe the nerve? It's ridiculous. Another pause, longer this time, more tense. Look, Sarah's right. This is getting out of hand. If she won't be reasonable, we might just have to, explore other options. His voice dropped even lower, conspiratorial. Dr. Evans mentioned competency. Evaluations could be initiated if there's documented concern. Just need to build the case, letters, observations. Yeah, for her own good, of course. Protect her from herself. Competency evaluation. Build the case. For her own good. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just talk anymore. They were actively discussing how to do it, how to take control, how to strip me of my autonomy, my finances, my life, all wrapped in the sickeningly sweet paper of feigned concern. I backed away slowly, silently. My hand pressed against my mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird, frantic and desperate. Retreating to the cold safety of my room, I locked the door, my hands trembling so violently I could barely turn the key. The betrayal was absolute, monstrous. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was a violation, a cold, calculated assault on my very personhood, my right to exist as an independent being. There was no more room for doubt, no more space for hesitation or second-guessing. I couldn't stay another night under this roof, waiting for their next move. I pulled out the suitcase I'd packed days before, my meager collection of clothes, my essential documents, the locket, George's photos, my sewing kit, checking its contents with renewed, desperate urgency. I waited, perched on the edge of the bed, listening, until the first faint hint of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple-gray, until the house finally settled into the deep, exhausted quiet that precedes the morning rush. Then, taking a deep, ragged, steadying breath, I picked up my suitcase, its weight feeling both insignificant and immense. I unlocked my bedroom door, the click echoing unnervingly loud in the pre-dawn stillness. I crept down the stairs, each step careful, deliberate, my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. As I reached the front hall, a floorboard creaked ominously underfoot. I froze, every nerve ending screaming, listening. Silence. Holding my breath until my lungs burned, I reached for the front door. My hand closed around the cool, unforgiving metal of the knob, and I turned it slowly, easing the door open just enough to slip through into the biting cold. Outside, the pre-dawn air was sharp, clean, carrying the scent of frost and damp earth. I pulled my thin coat tighter around me, the cold seeping into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the ice that had settled in my heart. Dragging the suitcase behind me, its wheels rumbling softly but seeming thunderously loud on the silent pavement, I walked away. I didn't look back at the house, at the life I was leaving behind, the life that had tried to consume me. My gaze was fixed forward, on the uncertain, dimly lit path ahead, fueled by a desperate, necessary, and finally awakened resolve. I had to escape. I had to protect myself. I had to survive. And this time, I would do it for me. The first fragile rays of dawn were just beginning to streak the eastern sky, painting the clouds in pale shades of pink and gray as I reached Arthur's gate. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a visible sigh of exhaustion and fear. The suitcase, filled with the scant remnants of my former life, bumped awkwardly behind me on the uneven sidewalk. He must have been watching from the window, anticipating my arrival, because the porch light flicked on, casting a warm, welcoming glow, and the front door opened before my knuckles even grazed the wood. Arthur stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light, his face etched with concern in the dim morning twilight. He didn't ask questions. His eyes conveyed a deep, quiet understanding. He simply reached out and took the suitcase handle from my numb, trembling fingers. "Come in, Eleanor," he murmured, his voice a low rumble of reassurance. "You're safe here." Stepping over his threshold, into the warmth of his small, meticulously tidy home, felt like crossing into another dimension. The air inside smelled comfortingly of old books, pipe tobacco, and faint lemon polish. A world away from the tense, suffocating atmosphere. I'd just fled. He led me to a comfortable, overstuffed armchair by the cold fireplace, gently draped a thick woolen blanket over my shoulders, and pressed a steaming mug of chamomile tea into my hands, my fingers too cold to properly feel its heat. "Tell me what happened," he said gently, settling into the chair opposite me, his gaze steady and patient. And I did. The words poured out, a torrent of fear, betrayal, and dawning horror. The overheard conversation, Mark's chillingly casual mention of competency evaluations, the calculated cruelty cloaked in false concern, my desperate escape in the pre-dawn hours. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively grimmer, his hands clenching slightly in his lap as I recounted the details. When I finally fell silent, the only sounds were the ticking of his mantel clock and my own ragged breathing. Silence hung between us, heavy but no longer isolating. It was the silence of shared understanding, of witnessed pain. "You did the right thing, Eleanor," he said finally, his voice firm, resolute. "The absolute right thing. Staying there. My God, it wasn't safe for you, not anymore." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine, conveying both empathy and urgency. "Now, we need to make a plan. First thing this morning, as soon as the offices open, we call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Eleanor, a good one. Someone sharp, someone who specializes in elder law, estate planning, asset protection, someone who understands these tactics." He spent the next hour on the phone, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority I hadn't heard from him before, making inquiries, checking references, scheduling consultations. By the time the sun was fully painting the sky, I had an appointment secured for that very afternoon with a highly recommended attorney downtown, a Miss Evelyn Davies. Arthur, bless his steadfast heart, insisted on driving me, waiting patiently in the plush, quiet reception area while I met with her, a silent guardian angel in a worn cardigan. Miss Davies was exactly as Arthur had described, sharp, intelligent, deeply empathetic, yet possessing a no-nonsense efficiency that immediately put me at ease. I laid out the entire tangled situation, the co-owned house, the precarious nature of Mark's finances, as far as I knew it, my own separate savings and pension, the unsettling conversation about competency evaluations I'd overheard, and my urgent desire for divorce and a fair, secure separation of assets. She listened intently, taking copious notes, her lips thinning into a grim line as I spoke. "They're playing a dangerous, ugly game," Ms. Davies stated flatly when I finished, her eyes meeting mine with professional steeliness. "Trying to declare someone incompetent is a serious legal maneuver, and judges don't take it lightly, especially without concrete, verifiable medical evidence. But the fact they even discussed it, that they researched how to do it, that's deeply concerning. We need to act swiftly and preemptively." She outlined a clear, decisive strategy. First, immediately file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, keeping the more damaging details of financial pressure and the competency plot in reserve as leverage if necessary. Second, simultaneously file a petition for an immediate partition sale of the house, forcing a resolution or compelling them to negotiate a fair buyout of my equity. Third, and most critically, draft new, ironclad power of attorney documents, naming Arthur, who had already readily agreed when Arthur Sr. called him, as my agent for both financial and healthcare decisions, explicitly revoking any potential implicit authority Mark might have assumed as my son. Lastly, she strongly advised moving my pension direct deposit and all my personal savings to new accounts at a completely different bank, accessible only by me or, under specific, legally defined emergency circumstances, by Arthur. Leaving her quiet, book-lined office, I felt a strange, disorienting mix of profound dread for the battle ahead and a newfound empowering sense of control. The path forward was daunting, strewn with potential legal and emotional landmines, but for the first time since the quilt incident, perhaps for the first time in decades, I felt I had agency, a concrete plan, a tangible way to fight back, not just retreat. The following days were a whirlwind of executing Ms. Davies' meticulously crafted plan, signing stacks of legal documents that made my head spin, opening new bank accounts under unfamiliar logos, carefully transferring funds, shredding old statements. Arthur was my constant shadow, my rock, driving me to appointments, sitting patiently through tedious explanations, offering quiet, unwavering encouragement, ensuring I remembered to eat when my anxiety threatened to consume me. The arrival of the divorce petition and the legal notice regarding the house sale landed on Mark and Sarah like a precisely aimed bombshell. Their reaction, relayed coolly by Ms. Davies, was immediate, predictable, and utterly furious. My old phone, which I'd kept charged but on silent in my purse, lit up like a frantic Christmas tree with a barrage of calls and vitriolic texts. Mark's messages, Ms. Davies reported with professional detachment, oscillated wildly between bewildered hurt. "Mom, how could you possibly do this without even talking to us first?" And thinly veiled threats. "You'll regret this decision. You'll end up with nothing, absolutely nothing." Sarah's, apparently, were pure venom, laced with accusations of selfishness, cruelty, and calculated destruction. "You selfish, bitter old woman tearing this family apart just because you didn't get your way. You're only doing this to hurt us. You'll pay for this." I instructed Ms. Davies not to relay the specific contents unless legally necessary. I didn't need their poison seeping into the fragile peace I was trying to build. I didn't respond to any of them. All communication went through our respective lawyers now. The partition filing, as Ms. Davies predicted, forced their hand regarding the house. Their lawyer initially tried delaying tactics, questioning valuations, proposing ridiculously low buyout offers. But Ms. Davies was relentless, presenting irrefutable market analyses and firmly rejecting their attempts to stall. It became starkly, painfully clear, even through the legal jargon, that they had leveraged the house to its absolute limit. Mark's debts were indeed far worse than I'd even imagined. Buying out my substantial equity required them to secure yet another loan, stretching their already precarious finances to the breaking point. During this stressful period, I remained quietly ensconced at Arthur's, venturing out only for necessities or legal appointments. The small, sun-filled guest room he offered, overlooking his peaceful garden, felt more like a genuine home, a true sanctuary, than the large, echoing house I'd inhabited for 40 years ever had. One evening he found me sitting by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, my reflection a pale ghost against the darkening sky. "It's hard, isn't it?" he said softly, pulling up a chair, instinctively knowing my thoughts, letting go, not just of the place, but of what you thought, what you hoped your life was. I nodded, tears blurring the raindrops on the pane. "It's not the house I miss, Arthur," I confessed, my voice thick, "or even the things inside it. It's the idea of family. The one I poured everything into, the one I thought I had." My voice trailed off. "Sometimes, Eleanor," he replied, his gaze distant, likely lost in his own memories of Martha. "The family we build isn't the one we're born into, or even the one we marry into. Sometimes it's the one we find later, the one that chooses us back, recognizes us for who we are." He looked at me then, a quiet, profound understanding passing between us in the dim light. "You're not alone, Eleanor. Remember that." Finally, after weeks of tense, back-and-forth negotiations relayed through lawyers, an agreement was reached. They would buy out my equity. The amount was fair, legally secured. The closing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I felt a profound, bone-deep sense of relief, mingled with a strange, unexpected sort of grief. Not for the marriage itself, but for the official, irrevocable ending of a life I had once believed would last forever. The day before the closing, an inexplicable urge pulled me back. I needed to visit the old house one last time, to retrieve a few forgotten, deeply personal items I'd left tucked away in the dusty attic. A small box containing George's old letters, a worn folder of Mark's childhood drawings, my grandmother's tarnished silver thimble, things with no monetary value but holding pieces of a past I wasn't ready to completely discard. Not yet. Arthur, understanding without needing explanation, drove me over, waiting patiently in the car, a silent guardian while I slipped inside. The house felt alien, cold, filled with the chaotic energy of lives unraveling. Mark and Sarah were thankfully out. Boxes were stacked haphazardly in the living room, furniture askew, evidence of their strained finances and turbulent emotional state. I quickly found what I needed in the dusty, cobweb-draped attic, the familiar scent of old paper and time filling my senses. As I carefully carried the small box back down the narrow attic stairs, I passed Mark's study. The door, usually closed, was slightly open. A compulsion I couldn't resist made me pause, peek inside. On his desk, amidst a sea of cluttered papers and empty coffee cups, lay an official-looking envelope from Dr. Evans's medical group. It was addressed to Mark. Curiosity, or perhaps a perverse need for final, irrefutable confirmation, made me nudge the door open further. It was a follow-up letter regarding a consultation about establishing potential guardianship due to concerns over recent behavioral changes and possible cognitive decline in a family member. The date on the letterhead was chillingly precise. Just 1 week after I'd overheard their hushed, plotting conversation on the phone. They had actually started the process. They had taken concrete steps. The coldness of it, the calculated, premeditated betrayal, hit me with the force of a physical blow. Any lingering shred of doubt, any microscopic grain of misplaced sentimentality I might have harbored for the life, the son, I was leaving behind. It evaporated in that instant, leaving only a hard, clear, necessary resolve. I walked out of that house without a backward glance, clutching the box of memories that now felt strangely disconnected from me. I got into Arthur's waiting car and didn't speak, couldn't speak, until we were halfway back to the quiet safety of his street. "They really were going to do it, Arthur," I finally whispered, my voice hollow, distant, guardianship, competency. They were trying to take everything. He reached over, his warm, dry hand briefly squeezing mine where it rested, white-knuckled, on the armrest. "But they didn't, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm, grounding. "They didn't succeed. You stopped them. You saved yourself." The closing took place the next day, a sterile conference room, lawyers flanking each side of the long, polished table. Mark and Sarah were there, their faces tight, drawn, avoiding my eye contact completely. We signed the stacks of papers in near silence, the only sound the rustle of documents and the click of pens. As the final wire transfer confirmation appeared on Ms. Davies's laptop screen, signaling the buyout was complete, a heavy, decades-long weight lifted definitively from my shoulders. It was irrevocably, finally done. I moved into my own apartment the following week, a bright, airy two-bedroom in a quiet complex across town, chosen specifically for its large windows and view overlooking a tranquil city park. It wasn't grand, certainly not like the sprawling house I'd inhabited for most of my adult life, but walking through its empty rooms, sunlight streaming in, it felt entirely, blessedly mine. Unpacking the few boxes I possessed, clothes, books, the carefully repaired quilt, my sewing machine, felt less like settling in and more like planting seeds in new, fertile soil. I set up the singer by the window with the best light, hung the mariner's compass quilt on the main living room wall, a reminder now of survival, not sorrow, and placed the box of George's letters and Mark's innocent childhood drawings on a high shelf in the closet, artifacts from a past life I could now finally view with the clear, sharp distance of painful wisdom gained. Starting over at 65 wasn't the path I'd ever envisioned, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, the road ahead felt entirely, exhilaratingly, blessedly mine to choose. Life in my sunlit apartment gradually found its own gentle, unhurried rhythm. The silence, initially almost deafening after decades immersed in the constant low-grade hum of family demands and unspoken tensions, slowly transformed. It became less an absence and more a presence, the comforting silence of autonomy, the quiet, steady pulse of a life finally lived according to my own internal clock. I rediscovered simple, forgotten pleasures, lingering over a second cup of coffee with a library book in the morning sun, walking aimlessly through the nearby park without a deadline looming, choosing what I wanted for dinner, even if it was just scrambled eggs and toast, remembering Arthur's gentle nudging and my own reawakened interest. I sought out the local quilting guild he'd mentioned months before. Walking into that first meeting, held in the bright, airy community room of the library, felt like stepping back into a version of myself I'd long thought dormant, buried beneath layers of duty and compromise. The room buzzed with a cheerful energy, colorful fabrics spilled across large work tables like scattered jewels, sewing machines whirred companionably, and the air filled with the easy chatter and laughter of women united by a shared passion. I was nervous, hesitant, feeling like an outsider, but they welcomed me warmly, without reservation. They admired the photo I hesitantly showed them of my mariner's compass, gasping appreciatively at the intricate points and the sheer scope of the work. There were no judgments about my age, my rusty skills, or my beginner status in their ongoing group projects. Only genuine encouragement, shared enthusiasm, and practical tips offered freely. "Your points are absolutely impeccable, Eleanor," exclaimed Martha, a woman whose twinkling eyes and nimble fingers defied her 80-plus years, as she examined a simple 9-patch block I was nervously assembling. "Oh, that color combination is inspired, added Chloe, a younger member whose energy seemed boundless as she juggled quilting with raising 3 teenagers. You have a real eye. Here, in this circle of women, my skills were suddenly visible, appreciated for their own sake. I wasn't just Mom, or Harold's wife, or the woman who keeps the house running. I was Eleanor, the quilter, a person with talent and taste. I started attending the guild meetings twice a week, losing myself for hours in the satisfying geometry of the patterns, the tactile pleasure of the fabrics, the quiet camaraderie of shared creation. We stitched and talked, sharing stories of triumphs and heartbreaks, recipes and recommendations, tales of joy, loss, and quiet resilience. I quickly realized I wasn't alone in my late-life reinvention. Many women there were navigating their own second acts, rediscovering long-dormant passions, or courageously forging new paths after life had inevitably thrown them unexpected, often painful curves. Arthur remained a constant, quiet presence in this new landscape of my life. Our friendship deepened, evolving organically beyond shared neighborhood proximity and quiet grief into an easy, comfortable companionship. We fell into a pleasant routine, meeting for brisk walks around the park lake in the mornings, sharing simple lunches at a local diner, attending free concerts in the park pavilion on summer evenings, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence on his back porch swing, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the deepening twilight. He told me more about his Martha, their shared love of gardening, the quiet, persistent void her passing had left in his meticulously ordered life. I, in turn, found myself sharing more about George, the good years before the illness, the difficult final months, and more tentatively, about the slow, almost imperceptible erosion of my marriage to Harold, the decades of feeling unseen. It sounds like you were carrying the weight for both of them. No, for all 3 of them. For a very long time, Arthur observed quietly one evening, watching the sunset paint the clouds in fiery strokes. I thought that's what love was supposed to be, I admitted, the confession feeling less painful now, more like a simple statement of past belief. Endurance, sacrifice, putting everyone else first. He turned to me then, his gaze direct but gentle. Love is also about being seen, Eleanor, he replied softly, his words carrying the weight of lived experience. Truly seen and valued and respected for who you are, not just for what you do. His words resonated deep within me, a quiet affirmation I hadn't realized I needed. He saw me, not as the discarded wife, not as a victim rebuilding her life, but simply as Eleanor, a person worthy of respect, of friendship, of being seen. And that quiet, unassuming respect felt like a powerful antidote, slowly neutralizing the decades of accumulated invisibility. News of Mark and Sarah, when it reached me, trickled in occasionally, usually through mutual acquaintances I couldn't entirely avoid, or sometimes via a reluctant, tight-lipped update from Arthur, who still saw Mark occasionally around the neighborhood. The whispers, the snippets of information, painted a consistent, grim picture. They were struggling, badly. The financial strain of the house buyout, coupled with Mark's persistent business failures and mounting debts, had taken its toll. They'd been forced to sell the large family house, my house, at a loss in a declining market, downsizing dramatically to a cramped, run-down rental on the far side of town. Sarah, stripped of the financial cushion my pension had provided, and forced to return to a demanding full-time job she disliked, was reportedly deeply resentful, the strain showing in her perpetually worried expression. Their perfect facade, meticulously maintained for years, had crumbled entirely, revealing the shaky, debt-ridden foundations beneath. One late afternoon, several months after the divorce was finalized and life had settled into its new, peaceful rhythm, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. I hesitated, a flicker of the old anxiety returning, then answered cautiously, bracing myself. "Mom?" The voice was hesitant, strained, almost unrecognizable. It took me a moment to place it. It was Mark. Yes, Mark? My tone was polite, carefully neutral, betraying none of the surprise or the sudden clenching in my chest. There was a long, awkward pause on the other end. I just wanted to see how you were doing, he finally managed, the words sounding forced, unnatural. "I'm doing very well, thank you, Mark," I replied evenly, offering no further information, no opening. Another silence stretched, thicker this time. I could almost hear him struggling on the other end, wrestling with pride, perhaps, or maybe just the sheer awkwardness of the situation he had created. "Look, Mom, things have been, well, they've been tough," he finally admitted, the words rushing out in a low, tight voice. "Sarah's working crazy hours. I'm trying to get the new business venture off the ground. The new place is small." He trailed off, the unspoken plea hanging heavy in the air between us. I waited, saying nothing, offering no solace, no easy solution. "We were wondering," he continued, the awkwardness in his voice almost painful to hear, "if maybe, just maybe, you'd consider helping out again, just a little, temporarily. Maybe watch Mason sometimes. He misses you. Or maybe lend us a bit, just to get through this rough patch." The request, though perhaps inevitable given their circumstances, still landed with a sickening thud. After everything, the lies, the manipulation, the cold-blooded discussion of competency evaluations, the utter lack of remorse or respect, he still believed on some level that he could ask me for help, for money, for my time, for another piece of my life. "Mark," I said, my voice calm, steady, and absolutely final. "We settled everything legally months ago. The house equity was divided. My finances, my pension, my savings, are my own now. They are not a safety net for your poor decisions." I took a slow breath, ensuring my next words were crystal clear. "Your financial struggles are yours and Sarah's to navigate. I will always be Mason's grandmother, yes, but I will not be your rescuer anymore. That role is closed." "But Mom, we're family," he started, his voice tinged with desperation. "I have to go now, Mark," I interrupted gently but firmly, cutting off the familiar guilt trip before it could gain traction. "I have a quilting class this evening." I hung up the phone before he could utter another word, my hand surprisingly steady. There was no anger this time, no surge of leftover resentment, no bitter satisfaction. Just a quiet, necessary affirmation of my boundaries. A clear, clean line drawn in the sand, marking where my life now began and where his responsibilities took over. Life continued its gentle, quiet unfolding. My quilting projects flourished. I even entered a complex wall hanging into the state fair competition and won a surprising, delightful second-place ribbon. My circle of friends within the guild and the library program expanded, filling my days with shared laughter, easy conversation, and mutual support. My friendship with Arthur deepened into a quiet, cherished constant, a steady rhythm of shared walks, companionable dinners, attending local concerts, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence on his back porch swing, watching the fireflies begin their nightly ballet in the deepening twilight. We were good companions, he and I, navigating the landscape of this later chapter of life side by side. respecting each other's independence while enjoying the quiet comfort of mutual understanding and unwavering support. One sunny afternoon, while sitting in the park sketching ideas for a new quilt design, a swirling pattern of vibrant sunset colors, I saw them from a distance, across the duck pond. Mark, Sarah, and young Mason. They were feeding the ducks, or rather, Mason was enthusiastically tossing bread crusts while Mark and Sarah stood behind him, seemingly locked in a tense, low-voiced argument. Sarah gestured emphatically, her face tight with frustration. Mark ran a hand through his already thinning hair, looking defeated, weary. Mason, oblivious, continued to scatter crumbs, occasionally looking back at his parents with a flicker of confusion. They didn't see me, tucked away on my bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree. I watched them for a moment, a detached observer to a familiar drama that no longer held any power over me. Then, closing my sketchbook, I gathered my pencils, stood up, and walked away, not back towards the past they represented, but towards the warm, inviting sunlight filtering through the trees ahead, towards the quiet, certain promise of my own peaceful afternoon. 2 years have slipped by like thread through a needle, each stitch adding to the fabric of my new life. My small apartment is no longer just a place to live. It's a sanctuary, overflowing with color and light. Fabric swatches in every imaginable hue cover my large work table. Pattern books stacked neatly on shelves, and the vibrant sunset quilt, my first truly free creation, hangs finished on the main wall, a daily testament to a journey completed, a life reclaimed. My trusty Singer sewing machine hums contentedly by the window most afternoons. I still teach my beginner's quilting class at the community center twice a week, finding unexpected joy in sharing the craft, guiding hesitant hands, watching confidence bloom alongside the patchwork squares. My students, a lively mix of ages and backgrounds, call me their quilt guru, a title that always brings a smile to my face. The Cool Margaret hip-hop video occasionally resurfaces online, usually shared by a laughing Eleanor, and it remains a source of fond, slightly embarrassed amusement. My friendship with Arthur is a quiet constant, a bedrock of warmth and easy companionship in my days. We still share dinners, take walks, attend the occasional symphony performance, or simply enjoy the comfortable silence of shared presence. We are good companions, he and I, 2 souls navigating this later chapter side by side, cherishing the gentle rhythm of mutual respect and understanding. There's no pressure, no expectation, just the quiet joy of knowing you are seen and valued exactly as you are. I occasionally hear updates about Mark and Sarah, filtered through the town grapevine, or brief mentions from Arthur. They're still navigating their path, still struggling financially, still learning the hard lessons of responsibility and consequence. They visit Mason, who is growing into a thoughtful young boy, occasionally, carefully, respectfully. Our interactions are polite, distant, the relationship fragile, forever altered, slowly being rebuilt on new tentative foundations. There are no demands from them anymore, no lingering expectations from me, only the quiet acknowledgement of past hurts, and the slow, uncertain work of individual healing. I am grandma, a role I embrace with genuine love when I see him, but it is a role now defined by joy, not obligation. I am no longer the family's default caretaker. That chapter is firmly closed. Sometimes, sitting by my window in the late afternoon, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues of orange and gold, I think back to the woman I used to be, the one who felt invisible, suffocated, trapped in a life meticulously built for others but never truly for herself. It feels like looking back at a faded sepia-toned photograph from another era. The sharp sting of the pain has dulled to a distant ache. The bitterness has dissolved, the resentment long since released. What remains is a profound sense of gratitude, gratitude for the unexpected strength I discovered within myself, for the dear friends like Arthur and the women at the guild who saw me when I couldn't see myself, and for the quiet, unexpected, and deeply satisfying beauty of a life finally, truly, stitched together thread by thread by my own hand. It wasn't the ending I'd once dreamed of, huddled within the expected confines of family, but it was a beginning, a vibrant, open, possibility-filled beginning that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. My life, finally, is mine, and it is beautiful.